Welcome to another coffee tasting. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor, and today we are tasting the House Blend by Starbucks. With this coffee, we're going to get chocolate notes with subtle nutty notes as well. And then with this coffee, we're going to primarily get those chocolate notes, and then the nutty notes is going to be similar to like a hazelnut quality. Really good. This is one of my favorite core coffees back in the day before we had the blonde roast. So this is really good cup of coffee. For those of you that are joining the live stream for the first time, welcome. I am honored to have you guys here. For those of you returning, welcome back. Thank you for all the support. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button down below. That helps me make this channel that much more better and provide more content just so that we can learn a little bit more about coffee. So thank you everyone for supporting me on this channel. When we do our coffee tastings, we like to brew our coffee 3 different ways. And that way we can really explore the different flavor notes that we get from the coffee from the different brew methods, because each brew method is going to give us different flavor qualities. It's going to give us a different amount of oils and a different amount of sediment, and that is going to impact the flavor. And so that is why we do that, so that we can explore all the different flavors that this coffee has to offer. Because you might like one coffee on a French press, but then you might like another coffee on a pour over, just because of the different flavor notes and qualities that it has. You might like those different flavor notes on a different brew method because they bring out different flavors. So for me, if it's a floral coffee, I tend to stay away from the pour overs because it's going to really bring out that floral flavor. So I'll go to a French press because they'll bring out more of those bitters, and those florals kind of take more of a back seat, not driving the cup of coffee so much. So when you brew pour overs and chemexes, when you first start your brew, you just want to pour a little bit of water right over the top, kind of get all the grinds wet, and then let your coffee bloom. So letting it bloom is letting the air in between the grinds rise to the surface. If you pour too much water over your grinds too quickly, you push that water down, or not the water, you push the air down, and it creates a barrier slowing down the brewing process. And so you end up with a coffee that took too long to brew, and then it's going to be over brewed. We're going to have an over extracted cup of coffee. It's going to be very bitter. So with this particular roast, this roast has cocoa notes and a subtle nut flavor. And with the pour over, we're going to get those really strong hazelnut notes. And then with the Chemex, it's going to be a little bit more balanced. We're going to have those hazelnut notes, but we're going to have a lot more of those cocoa notes present itself alongside those nut notes. But then because the Chemex is a triple paper filter, those notes are going to be very subtle at the same time. And what the triple paper filter does is it filters out more sediments and then catches more oils. So we're getting a cleaner cup of coffee and a much lighter flavor. With the French press, it is a full immerse cup of coffee, and with this one, we have the coarsest grind. It has the longest amount of time in contact with the grinds in the water as well. So we're going to have a heavy amount of sediments and a lot of oils in our cup of coffee in this one. And this one's also going to be a very balanced cup of coffee, but we're going to have a lot more flavor in this one. The flavor is going to be turned up compared to the Chemex. Excellent. That was a perfect pour over. So while we wait for the Chemex to finish brewing, we are going to go ahead and try our pour over coffee. So with a pour over coffee, you know that it was a pretty much perfect brew. If it took around 2.5 minutes, you got a nice bloom, and you got like a nice even grinds inside your paper filter. Ooh, that's really good. We're getting those nutty notes, and then we're also getting those chocolate notes as well coming off the top of our coffee. So immediately right off the bat, our tongue is being bombarded with those bright nutty notes, and then it almost has like a roasty flavor to it, like a roasted hazelnut. So it's really, really good. It's got a brightness to it. So those bright roasty notes is coming from the nutty notes that we get. And then as those bright notes start to wash away, we start to get those milk chocolate notes. It's not too intense. It's very, very subtle. You definitely get the nutty notes a lot more on the pour over versus the chocolate notes. So we're gonna go ahead and try the Chemex here. That is still a really good cup of coffee. When I drink coffee, I tend to lean towards the Latin American coffees because we get those nutty notes and the milk chocolate notes. So I enjoy a good coffee with some decent like hazelnut notes. Really, really good. So I would enjoy the pour over. If that was my only option, I would definitely enjoy the pour over. So now we're gonna go ahead and try the Chemex. With the Chemex, this is the triple paper filter, so we're filtering out more oils and more of those sediments. So it's going to be a cleaner cup of coffee. It's not going to be as bright as the paper filter because the paper filter gives us more of those oils, which is giving us those bright roasty flavors. This one we're going to have a little bit less oils and that same amount of sediment pretty much as the paper filter. So it's giving us a more balanced cup of coffee. So immediately right off the bat, we are getting a different aroma. We have definitely slightly more cocoa notes coming off the cup of coffee. Oh yeah, so with this one, we're still getting those bright roasty note flavors, but it's not the first thing that we taste like we do in the pour over. We're getting those nice cocoa notes alongside those roasted hazelnut notes. So it's a very, very smooth cup of coffee, very, very light too. It's really, really good on the Chemex because those milk chocolate notes really come through. That is good. That's really good. So now we are going to try the French press. With the French press, we are this is a 5 minute brew timer, and then with this one we're getting more sediments and more oil, so we're going to get a much more intense, flavorful cup of coffee. So we're going to get a lot more of those milk chocolate notes, and those bright roasty notes are going to be much more intense as well. So we're definitely getting that similar aroma to the Chemex. We're getting those milk chocolate notes with that slight nuttiness right off the bat. That is really good. Super balanced. So what's going on with this cup is we've got a lot of those milk chocolate bitters right off the bat. And then as the milk chocolate bitters start to clear away, we're starting to get more of those bright hazelnut notes. And as that milk chocolate bitterness washes away, it actually tastes really smooth and clean, almost kind of like the Chemex, but a little bit more intense in the flavor, but not too much more intense. This is a really good French press cup of coffee. That is good. The cocoa notes aren't too bitter. They are much more bitter on the French press than they are on the Chemex, but it's not overwhelming. And I guess that's a tribute to the fact that it is a medium roast, not a dark roast. Really, really good cup of coffee. Surprisingly smooth for a cup of coffee on the French press. Sometimes we get a little bit more of those intense bitter flavors. This one, not so much. It's really good. I like it a lot. And then so now we're going to actually contrast the French press against the Chemex because they both give us a pretty balanced cup of coffee. We are going to contrast the flavor notes against each other back to back. So we've got the French press on the house blend. It's giving us a balanced cup of coffee of cocoa notes and nutty notes, but this is going to give us those more intense flavors because we're getting more sediment and more oils. Okay. Wow. So what that did was now we're not really tasting those chocolate notes anymore because we're so used to those intense bitters on the French press that when we go from the French press to the chemex, um, we don't taste those chocolate notes anymore because they're so subtle and so light that it's not overpowering the current flavors that were taking over our tongue just a couple moments ago. And so when we don't taste those chocolate notes, what's happening is we're still getting those nutty notes that this coffee gives. So as I go from the French press to the Chemex, it goes from a evenly balanced cup of coffee to a like completely nutty, but we're missing out like that roastiness is a little gone too. So it really brings out the nuttiness of the coffee when you go from the French press to the Chemex. It's a very, very interesting um, phenomenon. Okay, so now we're going to go in reverse. We're going to try the go from Chemex to French press and see how that impacts the flavor. Okay, so those milk chocolates are back. Definitely getting those milk chocolates. Ooh, that's really good. So when we go from the Chemex to the French press, it's all about those chocolate notes. Those chocolate notes definitely are the driving factor of the flavor and difference in between the Chemex and the French press. Because as we go from the French press to the Chemex, we can't even taste the Chemex chocolate notes anymore because the French press chocolate notes are still lingering on and holding on to our tongue that we can't even taste the chocolate notes on this side. But then we go from the Chemex to the French press, we don't even taste the nutty notes because the chocolate notes are so amplified from going from the light to the dark that that's all we taste is those chocolate notes. And it's really good because the chocolate notes are some of my favorite notes when I drink a cup of coffee. So with this blend, this is the house blend created by Starbucks. They actually introduced this blend when they opened up their first store. This is the blend that's dedicated to Starbucks and itself. And so with Starbucks, they were inspired by Peet's Coffee. So Peet's Coffee was one of the first uh, suppliers of high quality Arabica beans in the western United States. And so with that, the founders of Starbucks were inspired by the fact that Peet's Coffee was supplying high quality Arabica beans and they wanted to do the same thing. So they opened up their doors in 1971 and they introduced the house blend, which is a blend of Latin American coffees that at first they sourced from Peet's Coffee themselves, and then eventually over time they started to source and roast their own beans. But in the very beginning of Starbucks, you pretty much drank Peet's Coffee through the Starbucks coffee shop. Um, but then it quickly evolved and became its own thing. But that's just a cool little story on how we can take inspiration from companies, even if it's your current employment, and kind of let it shape yourself. And if it inspires you, don't be afraid to step through that door and start your own business. It's your passion. So also with this coffee, this is a mixture of Latin American coffees. So it's some of my favorite coffees. I love Latin American coffees for the flavor notes that we get from it, from the nutty notes to the chocolate notes. And then there's a lot of cool stories that surround Latin American coffees and all the coffees around the world. So if you guys want to learn a little bit more about the stories behind the Latin American farmers, go ahead and check out the videos in my playlist. It's really, really cool. We got a whole lot of cool stories. So that is the coffee tasting for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. It was a very good cup of coffee. I hope your coffee was delicious, just as delicious as mine was. If you enjoyed today's coffee tasting, go ahead and hit the link down below. That is going to be a list of videos that I have done in the past. The link above is just going to be a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. Have a great day, you guys.